name is Sophia Lynn Denicolo. I'm a program attorney with Gulfcoast Legal Services.
For our listeners who aren't sure what human trafficking is, just give us a definition and how it manifests itself.
Of course. Human trafficking is, actually I have a great card produced by the Blue Campaign which defines it way better than I can, but it's, there's two main types of human trafficking that we see in the Tampa Bay area and around the country and the world, and that's labor trafficking and sex trafficking. So sex trafficking is in which a commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or which a person induced to perform such act has not attained 18 years of age. And then the labor trafficking is recruitment, harboring, transporting, provision or obtaining a person for labor or services through force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of subjecting someone to involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage, or slavery. And so the labor trafficking that we see, can manifest in terms of, it could be domestic servitude or, any kind of labor in a variety of different settings, work settings, and then sex trafficking is, obviously usually as along the lines of prostitution and things like that.
And what are the types of industries where we see this most commonly? Are there things like keeping an eye out on restaurants, things like that?
Yeah, so in the Tampa Bay area, we, here at Gulfcoast Legal Services, we have a grant to service, we give legal services to victims and survivors of human trafficking. And we see all types of human trafficking here in the Tampa Bay area. A lot of our clients come from, in terms of sex trafficking, come from sex trafficking rings where there are pimps or people that have sought them out, and they're usually in a vulnerable situation, and have sought them out and kind of induced them to perform these these sexual acts and against their will. And we see this is a pattern that we see with a variety of different traffickers in this area. It's usually not just one person. It can be one person seeking out, obviously one survivor or one victim at the time, but it's usually people who are preying on, the women, and can be men who are at somewhat in a, weakened state. There's something, going on in their lives where they're vulnerable to these situations. For the labor trafficking, we see a lot, in the restaurant industry, sure, that's a lot of behind the scenes. So, there's a big campaign, Look Beneath the Surface, big national campaign about human trafficking, Look Beneath the Surface. So we see a lot behind the scenes, and it's, everything from hotels to restaurants, and a lot of agricultural workers. We represent a lot of, labor workers that are induced, and factory workers are induced in their home country to come to the United States on the premise and the promise that they will, have, a good job that they're promised, and all these, things, provisions that are put in their place. They're promised that there will be all these provisions like, fair wages and good hours, and they pay, tons of money, a recruitment fee, and then when they get here, that's when the trafficking starts and the threats and, the subpar living and working conditions, and the constant threats for their safety if they don't continue working and do what the traffickers say. So that's really common, and domestic servitude is also something that we see. Hiring help and then trafficking people who are hired help in the home, and not really allowing them to be seen or allowing them to leave the home, and that's another industry. So it really is everywhere. It's really hard to pinpoint one area, but the important thing is to just really keep your eyes and ears open and ask those questions, those follow-up questions if you see something that doesn't seem right or seem right. Asking those follow-up questions and calling the hotline if you think that there's someone in danger, and letting them know also that they have that resource.
Today I'm focusing mostly on sex trafficking, international sex trafficking. Are places like massage parlors, is that a potential hotbed? I've noticed that there's a lot of massage parlors near military bases. Is that anything that you've seen that pattern?
Of course, that can be a big hotbed for sex trafficking. In our current, representation of clients, I don't know if we have any clients that have come directly from a massage parlor. However, that is definitely a place that seems to breed human trafficking, in the sense that it can be labor or sex trafficking, in the sense that these are often people that are brought in from other countries. So there's already a vulnerability there where they're not necessarily here on their own volition, or if they are, they're maybe afraid that they're going to be deported, and so they're vulnerable. They're very vulnerable to kind of get into these get sought out and get into these trafficking situations, and sought out and trafficked by traffickers in that sense, because they are already vulnerable, living here, probably supporting family back home. Maybe they borrowed money back home, and there's threats that if they don't pay it back, that they're going to be in trouble for their safety. So yes, definitely that's something that and any of the massage parlors, some of them can obviously be classified in the sex industry. So anytime we're dealing with anything in the sex industry, it can be definitely almost always linked to some sort of trafficking.
Recently there were some victims from Korea. Are there certain countries where that's the most common?
I would definitely say, countries with a lower socioeconomic, standard of living are most common. So there are a lot from Asia, definitely a lot from Latin America, from Africa. It really can be anywhere. But the trend that we see is that it's a lower socioeconomic background that tends to lead to this, because again, you're dealing with a more vulnerable population.
Going back to my question about military bases, is that just something? Is that a coincidence that it happens near military bases, or is that a trend that you've seen?
We haven't. We're not aware of that particular trend, and we haven't seen that in our work. But it's not to say that it's not a current trend. I'd have to look into more what's going on nationally and see if that's a pattern. But no, we haven't necessarily seen that trend.
And what are the logistics of how international people from other countries end up getting involved in or victimized by rings here? You used the word rings earlier. Is there some sort of pipeline that goes between the U.S. and internationally?
That's a great question. There's a couple different ways that happens. There's when the trafficker recruits abroad, so they actually go and they promise that I have a good job for you, and it can be the real job in the United States can be completely different. Maybe they say you're going to be working in my store, and they come and then they're working their house in their domestic servitude, and they take away their passport, or they say you have to do what I say, or else you're going to be deported, you're going to be in trouble, you're going to be arrested. So there's that type where they're recruited actually back home, and often they have to pay their entire life savings, probably their family's entire life savings, because again, we're dealing with lower socioeconomic countries, with lower socioeconomic standard of livings most often, and so that's a common trend. And then these are usually people that have the traffickers, usually people that have connections to that country. So either they're from there, or they know they're from the region, they speak the language, or they have people that work for them that do. So there is definitely that connection that makes them feel more more comfortable, or there's something going on in their language or their culture. So that's usually taken into account for. Or it's people that are living here already, and they maybe have a visa that's expiring, or if they've overstayed their visa, and they're living here from another country, but they're vulnerable because they don't have the same immigration rights as other people. So they're afraid that they're going to get deported, and maybe they're supporting people back home. If they get deported, there's no jobs. They're afraid they're going to go hungry. So there's issues going on there. And then when someone comes along and says, I have a job for you, and then once, or whether it's in the sex trade or not, and then once they start getting into it, they say, the trafficker then would say, you owe me, you have to do this. So that's really common. They get caught up in trafficking that way. And it's very, the frustrating thing is that if someone is recruited here and they do, they are trafficked and then they escape, they're at such a high risk to be re-victimized, because often, and these are people from another country that are recruited here, and then if they escape, they get away. That's great, but there's so many issues that, so much social support that they need and follow-up that they need so that that doesn't happen again. And the sad reality is that they are at a very high risk to get re-victimized because they've already been through that experience. So that's why it's really important, to reach out to the hotline, and also to, the national hotline, and also to reach out to local social service organizations that can help, on a pro bono basis, get, human trafficking victims back on their feet.
The hotline number is?
Yes, so the hotline number is, and it's part of the Blue campaign, but the hotline number is 1-866-DHS2-ICE, and it's www.dhs.gov/Blue campaign. So that, again, that's 1-866-347-2423.
All right, thanks so much for your time.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks.